keynote speaker. Okay. Our second speaker is Professor Volker Scheid. He once served as the president of ICTAM. Yeah. Compared to most of us, Professor Scheid has a very unusual vision for his career. He also aspired to be a Rui, a scholar physician, so he can bridge the gap between practitioners and scholars. And he has made great contributions as a practitioner, a teacher, and a historian and anthropologist of traditional medicine. Today's keynote lecture reflects his long-term pursuit. The title is Remedying the Medical Humanities with Vital Methods, 活法. Please join me in welcoming Professor Scheid.
Thank you very much, Sean, for the introduction and for the invitation to give this keynote. I have a lot of things to go through, so I won't do any more formalities, yes, and politeness. I want to talk about, start somewhere where Angelika started, carry on somewhere where Angelika started in the very first day when she talked about ICTAM as a place of meeting, but also a place of meeting where critical interaction takes place between the, I call clinical practice and the medical humanities. I use medical humanities, it's probably the wrong term, but I use it for everything that is anthropology, science studies, history, etc. Okay? And as Sean said, this is a topic dear to my heart because I'm both a practitioner, or I have been privileged enough to be for the last 40 years both a practitioner and a scholar researcher, engaging also in clinical research and in anthropology, medical history. What I want to talk about are two questions today. I want to raise two questions. So what role might the humanities have in remedying Chinese medical teaching and practice? That's something I've been doing for 40 years, and I think my answer is very clear on that. The second question, does Chinese medicine have a role in remedying the medical humanities? That's something that I've only been engaged in more recently. So that's more like a work in progress. Because we have so little time, the evidence I present on everything is very, very superficial. You can read up on some of it in what I've written. The rest will be forthcoming in some work I'm working on, yes? And also, I'm talking very much from, or I'm beginning from quite personal experience, my personal experience as a clinician and a researcher. And therefore, everything I'm saying is limited to Chinese medicine, specifically Chinese medicine in the 17th century in Jiangnan. But I hope I can make it speak to Chinese medicine more broadly, East Asian medicine more broadly, and even to other medical traditions like Ayurveda or Soya Rigpa, and to all your different experience that you have. So the first question, as I said, is what role might the medical humanities have in remedying Chinese medical teaching and practice? When I first started to learn Chinese medicine in the West, it was a very specific period. I'm kind of like the tail end of the baby boomers who created Chinese medicine as an institution in the West. So when I started, there were no textbooks. We didn't have any textbooks. We just tried to bricolage, assemble as best as we can from different resources, the kind of Chinese medicine. If you're interested, there is a podcast that is curated by a colleague of mine called Geological, and he has started to interview a lot of the people who were involved in doing this. And it's like a very fascinating story if you want to listen to this podcast about what happened at that time, how people could create something almost out of nowhere. And one of the drawbacks of studying Chinese medicine like this is, of course, that you're never sure that you know anything at all. My feeling of knowing Chinese medicine was very, very superficial. Later on, I went to China, studied a little bit more in very different contexts. The only thing that I ever thought I understood very well is something called Wenbing. That is treatment of fevers, infectious disorders, heat, something like that. I studied it with a student of a person called Zhao Shaoqing. He was at that time the expert of Wenbing in Beijing and also in China. And I studied in a kind of like traditional way. We would meet once a week, read the classical text of that tradition, and he would explain it to us with case histories and later treat it in the clinic. So when I came back to Europe, I organized what I think were the first courses of Wenbing in the West, and I believed I knew what I was doing. Now, how Chinese medicine currently, particularly ICTAM, thinks about disease is summarized in this diagram. Basically, you look at, does the disease come from outside or does it come from the inside? If it comes from the outside, you make a differentiation between cold and heat, and when it's heat, you apply Wenbing theory. Yes? And when it's cold, you apply something else which is called Shanghai. Now, and that's what I taught, yeah, to my students. And then about 7-8 years later, I had the opportunity to teach a group of German doctors for 1 week, and I recreated the conditions in Beijing, where I read with them the classical text and taught them in this way rather than frontal teaching. And I had the experience that actually what I was teaching them was totally different than what it said in the text. That was very strange to me. So I cannot explain that to you in detail, but here's one sentence that comes from Ye, one of the main kind of thinkers of Wenbing, and he says here that differentiating disorders to this Wenbing theory is the same as cold damage. Exactly the same, only the treatment is different. Yes, okay? So again, I cannot go into detail. It helped me understand. So because I'm also an anthropologist, what I could see is that what had happened is, in order to keep the Chinese medical tradition from fracturing into different tribes, so to speak, one had imposed a kind of lineage model onto the theory, as it were. Yes. So you have Ye Qianzhi's Wenbing as a kind of side branch of the older Shanghai tradition. So it stays together as one family, so to speak, but at the price of reducing, I would say, reducing the clinical effect, or even reducing or hiding Ye Qianzhi's original intention, which was clearly to offer something new to replace the old. And once you realize that and read the text, you also find in the text, very often, a different way of thinking about the social organization, the Buddhist one, for instance, whereby Ye Qianzhi is seen as the Dharma hair of Zhang Jing, where you have a very different possibility of innovating, which also not a break, but something totally new. Anyway, for me, it has helped to totally transform my understanding of Wenbing, my teaching of Wenbing, ultimately my understanding of Chinese medicine altogether. So that's, for me, a good example of the medical humanities being able to affect clinical practice, but it also draws our attention to what is always at stake, is social identity. So we cannot just change theories. Changing theory of practice involves changes in social identity. So if ICTAM wants to become a forum, or it could become a forum, then I think it's very important that it always has that in mind. You cannot just lecture practitioners, they won't like that. You have to be able to give them a space where they can be safe in order to help them maybe understand what we as humanities scholars create. So the second question, does Chinese medicine have a role in remedying the medical humanities? That might seem a strange question to you. But there are some people who are starting to think about this question, particularly in SDS and in anthropology. Actually a Taiwanese scholar, I don't know him personally, I would have hoped he would be here, you know him maybe, Lim Yuen, and together with John Law, he is elaborating, he's trying to work on a way of making Chinese medicine relevant to SDS. Tan Mei, who you might know, an anthropologist, she's starting to think about this, and also Judy in her own way. But however, I don't want to start with this literature or relate myself at all to this literature. I want to talk to my own, again, about my own experience as a researcher. For the last kind of 10, 15 years, even though I'm originally trained as an anthropologist, I ended up in 17th century China. I don't know why. And in Chinese studies, usually, I think, if you make a career in Chinese studies, you decide during your PhD what kind of period you work on. Then over time you become an expert in that period. So for me, coming into 17th century China when I was already in my mid-50s, I felt was a very risky strategy because I didn't know anything about 17th century China. So I thought I can add a little bit about medicine to that But general knowledge of that period I take from the experts, yes, okay? And if you read the initial things I wrote about that time, it's very much like that. But as I went on, I started to get a similar strange feeling of disjuncture between what I was reading in my text and what I was told was the reality of that time. And again, I can only give you three very brief examples of three different people of that time. First person is called Fang Yuzhe. He's a very influential doctor. He's influential particularly because he made one of the Shanghan Lun, which is one of the Shanghan texts, which comes from the Han Dynasty around 200 CE. He made it central to the study of Chinese medicine. He's very often portrayed as a typical scholar physician, and because he went back to the Han Dynasty, he's associated with something called Han learning and evidential scholarship. Actually, if you look at him, he's not a typical scholar physician at all. He's absolutely not part of Han learning. In fact, he's probably, as far as I can tell, the best example of Sung learning in the history of Chinese medicine. And Sung learning is that kind of learning that the Han learning was very much opposed to. So the opposite of what it's told to be. The second example is Yu Chang. Yu Chang is a little bit later. He's one of the main persons who promoted Fang Yuzhe's ideas. Some people even said he plagiarized them. Yu Chang is also portrayed as a typical Confucian scholar physician. In fact, he says Confucian scholar physicians don't make Confucian scholar physicians are not very clinically effective, so he didn't think of himself as a scholar physician. Also, he can only be understood in the course of his time, as this was the time when the when the three big teachings in China, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, people tried to create some kind of merging synthesis between them. In his life, he started off more as a kind of Wang Yangming Confucianist, but he moved over to become absolutely a Buddhist, a Chan Buddhist, and Buddhism became the model according to which he wanted to reshape Chinese medicine as a model for Chinese medicine, one of the most important models for him. Yet, if we read about Chinese medicine in late imperial China, at least in the West, after the 11th century, Buddhism has no importance for elite medicine. It's only important for popular and popular healing. In China, Taiwan, probably the situation is a little bit different, but still, the effect of Buddhism for mainstream medicine is acknowledged, but at the same time hidden. And my most important example is this third person called Fang Yuzhe. He probably doesn't ring many bells, but to people in China maybe. He's one of the, even during his lifetime, he was very famous, even during his lifetime, one of the most, 3 or 4 most important thinkers of the 17th century. So for the last 100 years, there's a whole industry of Fang Yuzhe research. I guess every year, every 2 years, there's a PhD dissertation coming out on him. So the literature on him is vast. Yes? Okay. The interesting thing is, in this whole Fang Yuzhe is very, very clear. And you have to, in everything I'm saying now, you have to remember, where 17th century studies are concerned, I'm a total amateur. Yes, okay? So if I can see something, everybody can see it. Yes, okay? So Fang Yuzhe is very, very clear. Medicines and medicine are central to how he thinks about the world. It's not the most important, well, maybe you could even say it's the most important, but it's a very, very important tool for him to think about all kinds of problems. Yes? And that's consistent throughout his life. So you have it here in this, medicine is even more important than principle, because the first thing that somebody mentions is more important than the third thing. And here he says, in the trying to understand the principle of things, medicine is a vast bellows that helps us to understand that. So these are just like 2 simple quotes to show you that I'm not making that up. Yes, okay? Why is Fang Yuzhe so interesting to so many people? Because Fang Yuzhe can be construed as one of the first real scientists in China, because he was interested in something called He was interested in things, in the investigation of things, kind of like Neo-Confucian session. And part of what he proposed is that in this investigation of things, material investigation should play an important part. And this really attracted both the interest of Westerners and also Chinese scholars. But if you read him, the material investigation is only the first step to a deeper understanding of things as you could call them vibrant or vital phenomena. And the more important second part is something called Tungji. But you see here how people talk about, and these are like eminent scholars of China of that period. They kind of belittle it, as if he didn't really know what he was talking about. Yeah? Okay? Now, again, if you just go a little bit back, you find out this Tungji is something that's important for. I think he was very clear about it. But you can also go back. It links via Yang Ming. It links to Chu Xi. It links to Zhou Dunyi. It links to the very project, the center of what Neo-Confucianism was about, to become a sage. To become a sage is about penetrating incipients. So it's not something that he was unclear about. It was just like, and yet it's somehow ridiculized. I find that very, very strange. And the medicine is almost written out of what he's doing. So it's changing a little bit. Particularly in Taiwan here and also in China, you have a generation of younger scholars who are starting to take his medicine more seriously. But it's still very possible. I think one of the most important dissertations, PhD dissertations on Fang Yizhe's philosophy that has been written in the last 3-4 years, doesn't mention medicine at all. Yeah, okay, it just doesn't occur. So I had to think about what is happening here. I don't want to go into, I'm not so interested in the reasons, I'm just interested in observing something. And what I observe is that people seem to pick and choose in how they want to read history. Very evidently, yes, okay? And I linked that here to Chakrabarti, a subaltern studies fellow from India called Chakrabarti, who's very influential in certain social theory circles. And she argues that in current academia, only European theory, or European insights are vital, and everything else is dead. It's just an object of study. And you could take that even further. If everything else is just an object of study and dead, if it doesn't fit because there's no resistance anymore, you can also you can violate it. Yes. So what I'm trying to do, I have made the conscious decision, because I'm as guilty as anybody else, but I have made the conscious decision to try as much as possible to avoid any Western theory. So Deleuze and Guattari and Heidegger and all the rest of them, I'm not interested anymore. Yes? Instead, I want to do the opposite. I want to see whether I can think with Chinese medicine about things that interest us as modern humanities scholars. Okay? So one of the ways I'm trying to do that is by borrowing the methods instead of the theoretical insights. One of the most important methods in SDS, in history of science, is something called controversy studies. You look where people start to disagree about something, and then you investigate and see what happens. So one of the things that is being controversial in 17th century China is the Tao of medicine. The Tao of medicine is basically what medicine is about. And the way I have started to look at that, there are certain key terms that people use. Some of them have been looked at by researchers like Yi or the Shanghan Lun, but some terms, even though they're very important in the discourse, again, in the medical history literature, it's almost silent on them. OFA, vital methods, are one of them. Vital methods, what do they mean? They basically mean how to adjust to local situations, something that we've heard repeatedly through these last few days. Yes, okay? Now the interesting thing is, vital methods become a theme in medicine in the course of the 13th and 14th century. They're introduced by a number of very famous and important doctors into the literature. The origin of the term vital methods, however, is not from medicine, it's from poetry. And in poetry, it's a tool to think about the creativity in poetry. And it's actually introduced by some of the people in the Chu-Xi circle, in the circle of Neo-Confucianism, Confucians, who started the investigation of things. But a number of people who were who were a bit critical of the way Chu-Xi, the dominant person, went about it. Yes, okay? The poets, in turn, took that term, vital methods, from Buddhists. Buddhists had developed a distinction between dead words and dead sentences and living sentences in their teaching. Living sentences were sentences that generated authentic, true knowledge that would take both the individual and the Sangha community further. Yes, okay? Whereas dead sentences were just a repeat, meaningless repetition of old stuff. So here we have, again, Buddhism, which is apparently totally unimportant for medicine, comes indirectly via poetry into the domain of medicine. Over time, this term of Huofa gets linked to other things, like, for instance, military strategy. It gets linked to a term called the Quan, which is also a very important term in Neo-Confucianism, which is totally almost absent from our studies of Chinese medicine. You could say that Quan Shu is the study of flexibility. By the way, all of these terms are obviously contested. That's the important thing. There's not like an agreed about meaning about how it should, but they are contested terms. So there's not one Chinese medicine, one 17th century. So it's a contestation about certain kind of meanings, about what the Tao of medicine is, carried on through these terms. So if you look at that, if the way Chinese medicine is portrayed at the moment, I think I'm not I'm not getting it wrong. Medicine is very much a recipient in the history of medicine. Medicine is a recipient of influences from other cultural domains, particularly like Neo-Confucianism, Taoism, etc., which then these doctors somehow manage to turn into medical theory and practice. But actually, like for instance, Kang Yi-chih is not the only person who thinks with medicine. Almost, not everybody, but many famous doctors, famous intellectuals, Wang Yangming, for instance. Medicine is central to how he thinks. Yes, okay? And you can take that even further back, I think, to the really Sung Dynasty thinkers who also start already to think with medicine about problems. So rather than having medicine in a kind of subservient recipient role, medicine is moved, I put it here to the center. It's not the center, but it's part of a wider, what Judy would call, ensemble of knowing practices. That include poetry, Buddhism, Taoism, male friendship, Neo-Confucianism, all kinds of things. And the people, sometimes the same person, like Kang Yi-chih was a polymath. Kang Yi-chih is everything. He's a doctor, he's a Buddhist, he's a Neo-Confucian scholar, Taoist, blah, blah, blah. Yeah? Some other people are only not as clever as he, they can only do one or two of those things. But they move between these fields in a very flexible way. Now, going back to controversy studies, whether we like it or not, however progressive and advanced and postmodern we want to be, I think controversy studies implies a number of very modern ideas about the world. Paradigms, thought collectives, epistemic breaks. It's always about boundedness in some way, them against us. Yeah? And we see in the current world where that leads. Almost all our problems at the moment, I think it's very obvious, is because of people drawing boundaries, artificial boundaries around things. Now, if you look at what happened in the 17th century, I think it's very different. Because there are no bounded, there are communities, but these communities are not bounded. People can move around between. Actually, as I said, in a person like Kang Yi-chih, he's everything. He belongs to all of those groups. So, for instance, thinking of medicine as the domain only of scholars physicians, I think it's just wrong. Right? Okay? I think it's much more about this here. If you want to understand that period, it is about this. Okay? So that helps. That changes how we think about medicine. Depending on how much effort we are going to put into that, I think that might help us to change even how we think about China at that time, by bringing medicine back into the mainstream. Yes, okay. So everybody who studies China at that time has to think about medicine, and not just the people who do medical history. But I think it can go even further, because what all these people were thinking about. Sorry, I have to go. What all these people were thinking about, or what they try to resolve in these various fields, is the tension that exists between singularity and principles or models, or what Judy called between the nomadic and the royal way of doing things. However, they didn't think they had to make a choice between one or the other. They had to find ways of negotiating that tension that is perceived as being essential to things and the world and everything that is. So, in this current moment in history, which a lot of people feel as a very, very dangerous moment, people look for ways out of this danger. And one of the people who looks out of this danger is very well thought of in Western philosophical circles, is an Italian philosopher called Rosa Braidotti. And she offers this theory of what she called nomadic theory. And I give you here a little abstract of what she thinks that is. As a kind of solution to getting away from these bounded communities, bounded epistemes, paradigms, etc., etc. But like everything modern, it's a utopia. It's constructed from Western philosophy. Of course, Deleuze and Guattari, yes, of course, Spinoza, and a few other people, but it's a utopia, because it's not real, it's an ambition for her. I think, looking what happened in 17th century China is not utopia, that's what people did. So I think Chinese medicine, at that time at least, could be a living theory for us to change not just how we do humanities, but maybe some other things too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Professor Scheid for this fascinating talk and give us great sense of responsibility for using our expertise to contribute to the world. So the floor is open for questions.
Thanks so much, Volker. I was wondering, in this, I wanted to ask about your final statement in the 17th century have these utopia kind of frameworks, but it's not quite utopia. It's a mode of practice, but also it's a mode of exchange. And I wanted to ask where controversy fits into that. And can you elaborate a bit more? I'm just trying to fit the pieces together. Thank you so much.
Okay. I mean, controversy is that we look at what I tried to put in this slide. Okay, so they always try to solve this, what I would call a problematic. Yes, my definition of a problematic is the conjunction of problems. Yes, okay. So the problematic, particularly in the universe of Qi transformation, Qi, is how you come to terms with this tension between, the singularity for a doctor, the singularity of each particular illness episode, but then you have some kind of principles, models, like what Angelica was talking about, the Wu-Tang. Yes, okay, that would be how do you fit those things together? And in the struggle about the Tao of medicine, I mean, people come up with different solutions. Yes, okay, also different solutions on how these boundaries should be crossed, what should be eliminated from this discourse. Some people are not at all happy about Buddhism, other people are happy about Buddhism. Some people elevate the poetry, other people don't like the poetry. Doesn't make sense. Yes, okay. So that's where the controversy fits in. Yes, and what I mean by, I think for Pratiotti, the nomadic is a utopia. It's something that she wants people to move towards. It's not what she says exists, because obviously she wants people to move towards it because the current situation is so awful. Yes? It's what we are not. What I'm saying is, in the 17th century, if I would have time, I could outline that more clearly. I think like a person like Fang Yizhi, if I was a philosopher, which I'm not, yes, okay? But one of the ways you could think about, he has got, and these people, they have a terminology, they have terms to think about how you can be comfortable in a world of difference. And, you know, as I said, I'm not a philosopher, but I could show you how in my clinical teaching, I have started to create a way, which I try to teach people, to be very comfortable in not creating Chinese medicine as a system, but be comfortable in a world of difference. Does it make sense? Yeah? Okay.
One final question.
Okay. Thank you, Volker. I don't think this is working. Thank you, Volker. I'm wondering, because you were talking at the beginning about practitioners and academics being involved in ICTAM more, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how we could possibly learn from these 17th century thinkers and being comfortable with differences between academics and practitioners, and if there's something practical ICTAM could learn from them.
One of the things we could have done is to put Judy and me, and then maybe some practitioners who are open, you know, maybe you, who are willing to read that kind of stuff, yes, okay, who have also, or maybe James. But this would then be limited to Chinese medicine. But one has to start somewhere, yes, okay, so I think it's in this particular context useful to limit it to Chinese medicine and people who know a little bit about it, yes, okay, and then just see what happens. You know, it's not for me to be prescriptive. I can be very prescriptive for myself, yes, so, you know, I could show you if I have time. I have a very clear idea for how I want to take this. As I said, I have a very clear idea, I have a methodology, I have experience actually in doing this, of how I can translate that into what, because I've done it now for several years, so I know it works, yes, okay? How I can translate that into a methodology for teaching Chinese medicine, for helping people to learn more about Chinese medicine, help them to get a better understanding of history without them realizing it, because they often don't want to do that, and start to feel really much more comfortable with difference. Yes, okay. So I haven't got the time, but I can certainly am willing to share that with you. Yeah. Okay.
I got sense we really want to continue this exchange, but unfortunately time is limited. So let's thank Professor Scheid for such a thought-provoking and rich lecture.